This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Matt Gupta.
Chapter 9. Islesfield. Gilorn had never seen Islesfield, the heart of Faelthor's governorship of Dacia. It was far from its best, but it was still quite breathtaking. The entire fortress was built onto a long, distorted diamond-shaped island in the middle of the widest part of the river, with 7 bridges that linked it to the mainland, 3 to the north and 4 to the south. The island was over 10 miles long and built into 2 hills. This made the fortress completely unassailable on the southern side. The walls were as high as the capitals, and the banners, depicting a shield laden with stars stood atop even higher towers, were blowing hard in the wind. Despite the spectacle, the area surrounding the fortress was in total ruin. The trees were bare, and statues that lined the road were crumbled, beheaded, and unidentifiable. As they approached the fortress itself, they passed broken buildings and town squares, which had been claimed by the overgrowth and the forest to the west. The horns of the kingdom sounded. Faelthor smiled to himself and took a deep breath of satisfaction. It is good to be home. A home isn't a home without women in my bed, Turgon grumbled, after a loud belch. That's because you think with your cock and not with your soul. There is no difference in my line of work, Turgon smiled. Not that you would know. I was young once too, Faelthor said dismissively, sensing where this conversation was going. You still are, Turgon clapped Faelthor on the back. You've just been unmanned. Quiet, Faelthor grunted sideways out of his mouth. You don't want the whole of the army to hear you, do you? I doubt it matters. Turgon leaned forward on his horse. Centurion, he called, to an officer who was walking in front of them. He turned and saluted, but kept walking. Do you care that your general has an arrow in his testicle and cannot make bastard children with it? No, sir. The rough man saluted and resumed walking forward. It was a genuine answer. It was possible he already knew. See? Turgon raised an eyebrow. This army would follow you up Ignatius's arse if you ordered it. Faelthor huffed, but he didn't say anything, shifting in his saddle awkwardly. They entered the fortress and dismounted. Faelthor let out a sigh of relief and took a drink of water, brought to him by a stable boy. Gilorn made it through the gate with Faelthor's entourage. Cameron was still in the capital. His guard had been changed by Ignatius. He didn't recognize any of the others, but he didn't get any sense of threat from them. He looked around the fortress. Several soldiers were looking down at them from the wall, and it sent a slight chill down his spine. Well, it's good to see that Cullis has been keeping things clean. Faelthor looked around, once he finished his drink. He'll be waiting to see us, Turgon grunted, as he waited impatiently for a soldier to bend down to let him step off his horse. I'll sort out the men. Very well. Faelthor nodded and waved him away. Set up the First Legion on the surrounds. I have a feeling that the next few nights will bring us some excitement. Expecting trouble? Of course, Faelthor said imperiously. We have the Sand People routers on one side and Ignatius on the other. Always some excitement, Turgon laughed. I need a drink. Ranger Gilorn, Faelthor called. Gilorn rushed over. Come with me. We have business to attend to. Gilorn's chill immediately evaporated, and he followed Faelthor up the stone stairs to the fortress citadel. Once at the top, Faelthor turned and looked out at the keep around them. There was a huge fountain in the middle of the courtyard that had a stone statue of a fountain legionary with a spear. The statue was facing them, holding its spear upright, as if it was holding a banner. "How big is this place?" Gilorn asked. "This is a 10-mile-long island," Faelthor answered distantly. "When I inherited and won back this fortress, it was completely destroyed. My father sided with the status quo when Ignatius took power, so he razed it to the ground, but let me keep it as a reminder of what happens when you defy him." "And yet you have political power to match him?" "Yes. Funny how that happens, isn't it? The first thing that I did was rebuild the walls around it. It took 5 years, but it's finally done." "Where did you find the materials?" Gilorn asked. "The ruins of the settlement around the island mostly," Faelthor shrugged. "Rebuilding the area hardly cost me anything. Fortunately, the citadel was mostly untouched, so once we rebuilt the roof and cleared out the debris, we had a base. The mosaic floor has cost the most." "It's very impressive," Gilorn said honestly. "Is it just an army base, or will you have people living here?" "An army base," Faelthor answered. He turned and headed into the citadel. "When I buy the land outside the island, then I'll work on building some settlements. But Ignatius is stonewalling me." "Why?" "Because it's what I would do. When you have that question form in your mind, simply assume the answer is, why not? He thinks I want to rule all of the woodland." "I thought you did already," Gilorn said, as they headed up the citadel stairs. "Ha!" Faelthor laughed, sinisterly. "It is true I govern Dacia and the garrison that is stationed here. I collect the taxes. Within that boundary, I have absolute dictatorship. But Dacia is a colony, not a Roman province. If I was to build an empire here, it would not be a pretty one." He turned to go back into the fortress, then added an afterthought. "Though I don't do much governing, I have a man for that." "And what does he do?" "Ensures that the men get paid and don't mutiny the fort." "So," Gilorn said, "he's a captain." "Yes, that sums him up quite well. Leadership is in the small details. You might find that out at some point. There's not a lot he can do. This is a fortress, not a village. The people who man the forges and the stables are here at the behest of the military, not because of the work opportunity." "I see," Gilorn nodded in vague understanding. "Do you have anyone else here?" "Not really," Faelthor shook his head. "Our food comes in from trade with the villages in the area. I suppose he negotiates with the village councils as well." "So slightly more than a captain then?" Faelthor laughed. Now, behave yourself." The doors to the main hall were slightly open, just enough for a single person to squeeze through. Faelthor pushed the doors forward. They opened with a loud and ominous creak. The hinges on the doorway let out huge clouds of dust. They hadn't been opened like that in a long time. 7 men were seated around a table, and they all looked up to see them enter. Well, the grandest of them stood, as he laid eyes on Faelthor. "Look at this. Welcome home, sir." "Thank you, Commander." Faelthor clapped him on the shoulder. "I relieve you with pleasure." "I am relieved." Commander Cullis smiled with genuine relief in his voice. He took off his brooch, which was a golden pin with a silver wreath on it, and handed it to Faelthor. "You are the commander of Islesfield again." "The Father blesses me." Faelthor examined the brooch and fingered it as if cleaning it with his thumb. "Commander Cullis, this is Ranger Gilorn, son of Halon." "The Kingslayer, I assume?" Cullis asked. "We could use more people like you here." "Well, allow me to reassure you," Faelthor nodded. "I have enlisted Ranger Gilorn into my service. He'll be with us for a while." "Excellent," Cullis smiled. The doors exploded open with a loud bang. "Ogre tits," Turgon bellowed loudly. "Where's the wine?" "General Turgon," Cullis smiled inwardly. Always a pleasure. Cullis, you cock. Turgon's attitude changed instantly. How are you? They embraced, and then Turgon started fiddling with Cullis's hair. You're turning grey. You're getting drunk. They both roared with laughter and punched each other in the chest. Get me some wine. We've had a long road, and I need to get the stink of horse off me. So you're going to drown it in alcohol? Gilorn asked. Of course, Turgon laughed. Is that a problem? Gilorn knew better than to carry on this conversation. No, sir. Turgon roared with laughter again. It never is. Let's get to business. Faelthor raised his hands. As they all sat in the chairs around the table, a spare chair was conjured for Gilorn. Then I can wash the road off of me. Turgon wasted no time in pulling over the nearest plate, which had an entire roast pig on it, and tucked in with carnivorous enthusiasm. Business should never come before wine, he muttered, through a mouthful of pig's foot. Getting business over and done with leaves more time for drinking, Gilorn shrugged. I'll drink to that, Cullis agreed, filling his goblet and draining it. A little bit contradictory, Gilorn said, uncertainly. Faelthor shrugged. A good leader knows what battles to fight and which ones not to fight. Only a fool gets between another man and his drink. I'll drink to that too, Cullis drank. And I'll drink to him drinking to that, Turgon toasted. There was a roar of approval, and everyone drank, even Faelthor. Gilorn couldn't help but shake his head. Romans, he muttered to himself. Yes. Romans, Faelthor replied sternly, apparently hearing him, and raising a somewhat irritable eyebrow as a drink was poured for him. After a barrel of drink, the men finally began discussing what they needed to do. All right, Faelthor slurred, somewhat worse for wear. We have 4 legions of provincial militia to disband. Where should we start? We'll do it 1 cohort at a time. 1 every 2 hours. That should ensure consistency. Faelthor nodded in agreement. It'll be a long process. That's nearly 20,000 men. I imagine many will simply desert when they see their friends leaving. At least we won't have to pay those men in victory fees. We could fully open the front gate, Gilorn offered, his restraint heavily tempered with wine. Encourage more of that. Not without endangering the fort, Cullis slurred. We open the door fully, we'll never get it. He made to drink from his goblet, but just as the cup touched his lips, he keeled backwards and crashed to the floor in a drunken sleep. I said he didn't have the stomach for drink. Turgon shook his head and took Cullis's cup, completely unperturbed by the mountain of goblets sitting in front of him. Faelthor laughed. Well, let's disband the 7th Legion first. Most of the rangers there are unharmed and live in the far corners of the kingdom. They'll get home at the same time as the rest. Getting rid of the rangers would lower the costs of that training routine you got them going through, Turgon growled, aiming the last bit at Gilorn. Yes, indeed, Faelthor rummaging through the scrolls in front of him. See to the arrangements. Any who leave of their own violation will not receive a bonus, but keep that to yourselves, for now. Good, Turgon shouted, slamming a hand on the table. Now, I am in need of a very dramatic piss, and more importantly, the legs of something with brown hair. You never change, Faelthor smiled. He shook his head and gestured to Turgon to leave the hall. Turgon stood up, his chair collapsing behind him. The drinks seemed to go straight to his head, and he swayed slightly. Once he regained his balance, he staggered out of the hall. They could hear him bellow through the door. Men, find me something with huge tits and dark hair. All right, Faelthor said, after Turgon left. We'll disband the 7th tonight. What should we do with the others? Put them to work rebuilding the fortress. A legate who Gilorn did not know suggested. There's a limited amount we can do. One of the garrison captains spoke for the first time. Most are farmhands, not builders. Indeed, Faelthor agreed. Any increase in the military might of the fortress and the capital will descend on us like a dragon. We could clear out the second keep, the captain suggested, and secure western flank. Is that a good idea? Gilorn asked. The wreckage does make an approach from the southwest more difficult. More difficult, yes, the captain responded, but not impossible. And when I want a lowly ranger to tell me about things military, I will ask him. It's too late in the day for arguments. Faelthor cupped his head in his hands. Gilorn, you are correct, but we do need to be able to man the battlements on that front. The wreckage makes it difficult for us as well as the enemy. It would also shave half a day between here and the bridge for the army. It would make the difference in a relief for the city if it was ever attacked. Dacia also, the legate nodded, casting a glance at Gilorn. I don't know how the capital would think of it, the captain said. A large portion of the income to the region comes from tolls to cross the bridge. If we provide cheaper crossing of the river, then that's that income gone. Ignatius will have your balls in a twist. Figuratively speaking, he added. Well, we'll have to charge the same toll the bridge has. Faelthor nodded as a servant came over with a document to sign. Ignatius will simply cry out, "You're trying to get a profit out of the people." He'd be right, of course. Faelthor did not look up from the document as he scribbled his signature. I'd rather be suspected of being greedy than have a fortress I can't defend. Now, unfortunately, Turgon isn't the only man in need of a rest. He stood up. Send my physician up to my chambers, he instructed the captain. All this riding has been hard on my wounds. Yes, sir, the captain nodded. And so, my friends, Faelthor nodded to Gilorn and the captains, I bid you good night. He left, and thus Gilorn had no reason to stay. He departed the hall and found where his company was in camp outside the wall. Iorlim was throwing stones at a ruined stone wall, which seemed to have been used as a forge of some kind. You stink of wine, he greeted. You're telling me, Gilorn groaned, taking off his cloak and sitting in relief next to Iorlim. I've never seen so much wine in my life. And yet General Turgon seems unaffected. I swear that man is part dwarf. I didn't know you knew him. We frequently have drinking competitions. He just doesn't recognize me when he starts. But you have such a memorable face. Suck cock, Iorlim grumbled without effort. Gilorn laughed and threw a stone at the wall. So, when are we going home then? Not sure, Gilorn shrugged. The 7th Legion is getting disbanded tonight. They're doing it all on expenses and who lives where. Expenses? Payment for the military duties, injury and death compensation, Gilorn said. Bureaucratic things like that. The 7th Legion is the easiest one to disband. If we stay and get disbanded on time, we'll receive a bonus, apparently, so no running off. It will probably be a single coin each, Iorlim glowered. Victory bonus, he spat. The general's too smart to give out gold too readily. Besides, he has to pay your reward. You're probably worth an entire legion by yourself. Gilorn laughed. I've already sorted out my reward. Riches? Partly. My child, when I have one. They're going to support him or her. So no money for you? Of course money, Gilorn scoffed. I've been promised a large salary for a permanent position in Faelthor's entourage. Oh good, Iorlim said. I can leech off of you for now then. Good luck with that, Gilorn smiled. I'm the Kingslayer, remember?